Hey everyone, this is Dr. Tom with Peachtree Plastic Surgery, and today we're going to talk about something super fun, the 6 decisions you need to make when you're considering a breast augmentation. So these decisions, when you're considering a breast augmentation, there are a lot of things that you don't think about, and even you might have consulted with some plastic surgeons and talked to a couple people about it or talked to your friends about it, and you don't realize that there are a number of decisions, actually 6 to be specific, that are important that you get to make. You'll make them in consultation with your plastic surgeon, who will be an expert on the procedure and will help guide you when these decisions are made, but they are your decisions to make. This follows a patient decision aid that my wife and I developed and is endorsed by the Aesthetic Society, and we'll post a link to it down below, and you'll see some of the pages displayed here as we go. So the first decision you need to make, what size you want. Now the size, everyone thinks that this is the most important decision. It's not. It's really not. And I'll tell you why. Because sizes are very relative. If you're a very narrow framed person, putting 400cc implants in you is huge. Those are big implants for you. But if you're very broad and your base width, which is basically the footprint of your breast, is very large, 400 cc's might not be much at all. So it's a very relative thing. And it's funny when you look online, people talk about the size they got. I got 325s and they are perfect natural breasts, and I got 450s and they're perfect natural breasts. And so, but every person is different. And it really depends on how wide your chest is, what's going to look big or what's going to look small or augmented or not augmented or natural. And to give you a point, I brought some toys. So here is a breast implant. This is a very large breast implant. This is a 750cc Allergan implant. Now, this is a much smaller implant. This is a 545cc implant, and you can kind of see the difference. But what you can see, what you should see, is the difference in width. This is a much wider implant on this side. Its diameter is much larger. So if you were to put this implant in someone with a very narrow chest, the whole side of the implant would hang out in the chest, and then you would bump into it every time you moved your arm. That'd be awful. Yeah, and that happens and people hate it. In picking the right size is important. When you meet with a plastic surgeon, he or she will measure the size of your chest and determine kind of a range of implants that would fit your chest and what would work well for you. The second decision you gotta make is the implant fill. What this is what's inside the implant. And there are 2 options here, saline or silicone. Saline implants have been around forever. This is just salt water, and these are great for certain people. Saline implants are great for people who don't want a silicone-filled implant in their body. They are great for people who don't want to worry about knowing whether it ruptures. So if a saline implant ruptures, it deflates. And you know immediately that it's ruptured, and then the salt water just gets reabsorbed into your body, and you have to fix it, but it's not something that is immediately concerning that silicone is going to leak out. Saline implants are also a little bit more cost-effective traditionally, and you have a smaller incision that can be used to place them because you inflate them once they're in the body. So those are kind of the advantages of silicone. They are also FDA approved for women 18 years and older, as opposed to silicone, which is only FDA approved for women ages 22 and older. Now silicone, there are many different types of silicone, but essentially this is a silicone implant. I wish I had a saline implant to show you, but I don't. But this is a silicone implant. Generally speaking, silicone implants are said to feel more natural. And there are different types of silicone fill. You can have a gummy bear fill, which is a more firm silicone, or you can have a less cohesive or a more traditional silicone implant, which is softer. There's also the amount of silicone that's inside of each implant. So these are 2 implants that are relatively the same size. However, this implant isn't filled nearly as much as this implant is. And you can see when they sit next to each other, this one's kind of caving in at the top and this one looks like more of a dome, right? This implant feels more firm because there's more fill, there's more saline or more silicone inside of this implant. This one feels softer. If you hang them up on the chest though, when you're standing, this one holds its shape better. This is going to give you more fullness on top, but it's also going to be more firm. This, when you're standing up, and let's say this is in your chest, it's going to look something like this. This is more of a natural thing that a breast does, and this is a softer implant. However, if you have thin skin, you'll notice that it ripples. And if your skin is really thin, or this isn't placed under the muscle, you will notice this rippling. So there's different things. And in general, most implants in the United States are silicone implants. The next decision, shaped implants. You get to decide whether you want a round implant or an anatomically shaped implant. The implants I'm holding up here are round implants. They are basically just a dome. They are the most commonly placed implants in the United States. And the reason for this is when it's in the body, it doesn't actually look like a dome. When you're standing up and it's on the chest wall, it looks like this. And the volume kind of goes down and makes a natural breast teardrop shape. But because it's round, you get more fullness on the top. Less of it falls down. Here's an anatomically shaped implant. And if I hold this in my hand, you can see how it's shaped. It has a form to it. And you hold it up against the chest and it maintains that form really well. The advantage to these in certain patients, like really thin skin patients, or patients who have a lot of fullness up top but need more on the bottom differentially to make a more symmetric and harmonious breast, these are great. The downside to these, there's two downsides. One, they're all textured, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but they can also rotate. So you can imagine it's sitting on your chest like this. There's a potential for it to sit on the chest like this if it rotates, and this is a very abnormal looking thing. The next decision you need to make is the shell. Now this is the controversial decision, and this has been in the news a lot, textured implants. These are smooth implants. The shell is the thing that holds the silicone or saline in, and here you can see this is a smooth one. This is the most common implant that's placed in the United States, a smooth, round silicone implant. Texturing is like that anatomical implant, and it has a velvety kind of texture on the shell. What texturing does and what it's good for is your body grows into all the little grooves around it, and it stays in place a little bit better than the round implant, the smooth round implant does. There's also some evidence that this prevents a common complication called capsular contracture, which is where your body builds a really thick scar around the implant, and it causes your breast to get firm and a little misshapen. The problem with textured implants, and you probably have read about this, is ALCL, or anaplastic large cell lymphoma. That is a breast implant specific cancer that occurs in certain patients who have textured implants or have ever had textured implants. It is rare, but it is a real possibility with textured implants. It's something that we are learning more and more about as time goes on. And once we discovered it, the rate of planting textured implants plummeted. The vast majority of people don't want to risk having a breast implant associated cancer, and so they get smooth implants. The next decision that you need to make, this is the fifth decision, is where you want your scar. So there's a couple different places we can put the scar to insert the implant. The most common are periareolar, or around the areola, and inframammary fold, which is under the breast. The advantages of under the breast are that there's a much lower rate of capsular contracture, and that's that dreaded fear of your body building a really thick scar around the implant over time. The way we think that works is that when you go under the breast and on top or underneath the muscle, you're not going into the breast gland itself. The milk-producing ducts of the breast gland have bacteria in them, and we think that when you cut through those ducts and put an implant through, the bacteria can seed the implant in some way, and that leads to an overactive immune response in developing a capsule of scar tissue, and that leads to a greater incidence of capsular contracture. The downside to the inframammary fold incision is that it's underneath your breast and you can see it. Granted, you can only see it from really narrow angles, and it's usually pretty well hidden, but it is an incision that you can see. The periareolar incision is a little incision right around the areola, and it's hidden in the areola. And that's the main benefit. A lot of people are afraid of an incision on the bottom side of the breast or in the inframammary fold. And so for people like that who really don't want to see a scar, the periareolar incision is great. Now this can still scar. Sometimes the scar can be more visible with a periareolar incision. It kind of depends on how you heal as a person. But the downside of that is the higher rate of capsular contracture. And that's because you have to go through the breast gland itself, usually, to place the implant. There are other ways to do it. You can make an incision through the armpit, a transaxillary incision. Some people do that. And there are some people that put a saline implant through the belly button. I personally don't recommend this because it's really hard to put them in the right spot or very accurately through the belly button. I like to make a perfectly placed implant that's right where you want them, and so it looks perfect. It's really hard to do that through a long tunnel, but some people do. All right, the sixth decision that you get to make is where you want the implant placed. Over the muscle, under the muscle. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. Putting it under the pectoralis muscle gives you better coverage. You can imagine you're taking an implant, and instead of covering it with a thin sheet, which you could see the outline of an implant through, which would be your skin and your native breast, you are now covering it with a thick quilt, which prevents you from seeing the edges of the implant and seeing that rippling that we demonstrated earlier. The downside to this is, one, it's a more painful procedure because you're lifting muscle off of ribs. It can be more painful. And two, in women who are very athletic or are bodybuilders or are very thin-skinned, you can get something called animation deformity, where the pectoralis muscle, when it contracts, can push down the implant. And you can see that when you move or work out. And it's you can look up videos of this online, and it's a very noticeable thing. But that only happens certain times with certain techniques. And again, this is a discussion for your plastic surgeon. When you put an implant over the muscle and under the gland, it's a much easier recovery. The downside to this is there is a higher risk of capsular contracture. Over time, the implant tends to fall more. It can tend, because it's not as supported by having a muscle over top of it holding it in place, it has a tendency to bottom out or fall and drop off the chest. These decisions, one of the things I want you guys to take away from this is these decisions have a lot of nuance to them. It really depends on who you are and what your goals are. So a saline implant might be right for somebody who wants to save on cost or wants a really augmented look, wants really round upper pole fullness. You can overfill a saline implant to get that. Also, scarring, where the incision's placed, the size, and whether anatomically shaped or not the right decision really has to do with your values and also your particular anatomy. So these are things you got to talk to your plastic surgeon about, and they will help guide you through these decisions. But just ultimately remember, they are your decisions to make. Breast augmentation is my favorite surgery to do. And you know why? Because it's so good of a procedure. It changes lives and makes people so confident in themselves. They love it, and I love it. And almost everybody is happy that they did it. It's a 98% satisfaction rate. It's the highest in all of plastic surgery. It's a wonderful procedure. But there are some decisions you need to make and some things you need to know. So thank you for joining me for this video. Please like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not, then I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you later.